Today's presentation is titled Strategies to Help Change Teams Successfully Implement the Person and Family-Centered Breast Care Practice Guideline. Our keynote speakers for today are Meghan Gilbart. And Meghan started her nursing career at Lakehead University as a nursing student in the BScN program in 2008 and graduated in 2012. She was subsequently hired at Red Lake Margaret Cochenour Memorial Hospital that same year as one of their staff registered nurses. And in 2016, she transitioned to a new role as a public health nurse for about a year. Recognizing that she had a passion for caring for patients, improving outcomes, and being a strong support for the hospital team, she returned to Red Lake Margaret Memorial Hospital in 2017 as a nurse manager. And in 2019, she was promoted to Chief Nursing Executive, and she continues in this role today. We also have Amanda Kaczmarek. She's the Director of Risk and Quality. Amanda's background is in athletic therapy. And prior to moving to the hospital environment where she now works, she was involved in the Aviation, Forest Fire, and Emergency Services branch of the Ministry of Northern Development, Mines, Natural Resources, and Forestry in various roles. Currently, Amanda is the Director of Risk and Quality at Red Lake Margaret Cochenour Memorial Hospital. She oversees the hospital's patient relations, quality improvement, emergency preparedness, privacy, and risk management portfolios. She also manages the IT team, housekeeping, laundry, and food and nutrition departments. Her love for human involvement drives her health and leadership goals, and she's very passionate about equitable care. When she's not working, she spends much of her time outdoors and loves competitive activities. So once again, I would like to welcome Meghan and Amanda.
Hi, everyone. This is Meghan speaking. I'm the Chief Nursing Executive here at the Red Lake Hospital. And we are going to be discussing strategies today to help teams successfully implement the person and family-centered care best practice guideline and our experience in that in relation to focusing on the Indigenous patient care experience. So I will pass it over to Amanda to start with our land acknowledgement.
Hi everyone, I'm Amanda. Before we begin, I would just like to take this time to acknowledge that we're walking on the lands of the Anishinaabe, Waukee, and Métis people, and we're in the territory of Treaty 3. It's particularly meaningful to do land acknowledgements for me as I've enjoyed this land and its resources for many years, and I hope this acknowledgement captures my gratitude and appreciation for being able to continue my journey. Just getting control of my arrows on my end. I wanted to start with a brief history about Red Lake as a community, as well as the Red Lake Margaret Cochenour Memorial Hospital. Red Lake was actually named from an Ojibwe legend that occurred thousands of years ago, where two warriors of the Chippewa Nation came upon a very large moose beside a lake. They believed it was Machi Manitou, an evil spirit, and tried to kill it. Wounded, the animal escaped by diving deep into the lake. A large pool of blood colored the water red, and the hunters named the body of water Miske Sakagan, or Color Blood Lake. Over the years, it has become known as Red Lake. Red Lake Hospital itself is located in northwestern Ontario, close to the Manitoba border. It's an 18-bed acute care hospital located 2 hours from the Trans-Canada, 2.5 hours away from the next nearest hospital, and approximately 550 kilometers from the closest tertiary care center. We serve the communities of Red Lake, Deer Falls, and Wabasking First Nation with a combined population of approximately 5,500 people. The hospital itself employs 95 full-time, part-time, and casual employees. Together with a complement of 7 physicians, we provide 24-hour emergency care, inpatient acute and chronic care, and low-risk obstetrics. We also have a telemedicine program, provide chemotherapy for oncology patients, and endoscopy services in collaboration with a visiting specialist. Our multidisciplinary team includes laboratory, diagnostic imaging, ultrasound, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, nutrition counseling, and diabetes education. The Red Lake Hospital also offers mental health and addictions counseling through collaboration with the community counseling and addiction services who are located off-site. When we decided to become part of the BPSO program, I think that choosing the patient family-centered guideline itself was an easy choice for us. It has always been a driving factor, and generally we do get really good feedback when we look at our survey returns. We also thought it was important to take on this guideline because we felt we were at a point where we needed to take the next step, but we weren't sure which direction we would go. So it seemed like a great fit. And then to push it to an organization-wide objective just seemed logical. In terms of focusing on our Indigenous relationships and patient family-centered care, that came about through our process of strategic planning, looking at our community demographics and considering the community history in which we live. During our strategic planning, Indigenous patients, we went out and conducted focus groups out in the community, and Indigenous patient experience repeatedly came forward. It was felt at the time that there was discrimination, a lack of empathy, and that the physician approach to seeing frequent clients included a poor tone of voice and questioning reasons for visits. We also were asked to recognize that services may need to expand and change for our Indigenous population, which with a project that is coming through called the Road South. This project entails connecting an all-season road for 6 far north communities to the community of Red Lake. The demographics of Red Lake in northwestern Ontario include the largest geography health zone with the lowest population, a lower life expectancy compared to the rest of the province. Aboriginal people live on average 5 to 7 years less than non-Aboriginal individuals, and 22% of our population identifies as Aboriginal. There is also higher rates of mental health and addictions. Unfortunately, northwestern Ontario also has the community history of having an Indian hospital. Once we decided that we would focus on our patient experience for the Indigenous population, we started doing our improvement projects. So we chose to use the formula of a Plan, Do, Study, Act, also known as a Plan, Do, Study, Check. And as a first step, we began with a gap analysis to find out where we were at and where we want compared to where we wanted to be. This took a bit of digging on our end, as our feedback, as I mentioned, was generally positive. But as we dug further into that feedback, we realized that our surveys are very westernized and assume a certain amount of privilege. We assume that individuals that we're sending feedback surveys to have either homes or easy internet connection, which is not always the case here. There was also questions about predetermined questions that come from other organizations or that we need to report on for accreditation or to government bodies, not actually capturing what is meaningful to this patient group. We know that intergenerational trauma can lead to addictions issues, which may lead to homelessness and cause further marginalization in terms of feedback collection. Taking this into account, we realize that despite our catchment area being approximately 22% Indigenous, our survey return was less than 5%. We knew at that point we were missing the voice and the feeling of cultural safety, and those were the gaps we chose to address so that we could eventually move towards providing care through a therapeutic relationship that captures the whole person. To start our implementation, we looked at doing leadership training, and our leadership team was able to take Sanya's ICS training. It is a program that's offered out of BC, and I was looking at the website the other day, and they offer an Ontario component, and I think also a Manitoba or Saskatchewan one. Regardless, I would recommend this course to any person out there. It was very valuable as a learning tool. We also inserted mandatory training for all staff that included cultural safety education with an Indigenous component. We started to recruit exclusively Indigenous persons to join our patient family advisory committee, and we hold a spot on our board of directors for an Indigenous perspective. While we were in the middle of rolling out this training and working through it, March 2020 came, which is our first big hiccup on the road with the emergence of the pandemic, where there was a big swing in priorities and actually a lot of limitations to patient family-centered care in the terms of visiting. Once we had our new processes in place and we had things, as much of you guys probably experienced, under a bit of control, we started to find our new normal within the pandemic. And then August 2020, we experienced our first community evacuation, which included the entire evacuation of our hospital and our connected long-term care home. We thought we did excellent during this first evacuation. We had patients cleared from us and the long-term care home within 8 hours, despite various setbacks that included broken buses, contacts on vacation, and just with any emergency. They never seem to happen when people are sitting at their desk in office. They happen generally when it's off hours.
So in the context of our guideline implementation timeline, as Amanda said previously, we faced many barriers, including both external barriers uncontrollable by us, as well as internal barriers were more commonly faced under usual circumstances. So I will just elaborate more on our unprecedented barriers experienced in the last couple of years, as these barriers pose the most significant challenge for our team. As we can all relate, the COVID pandemic has caused significant stress, resource allocation, and burnout amongst all healthcare providers, leaders, and support staff. With that being said, there has also been some opportunities within this uncertainty, a few of these in which we have taken advantage of, in which I believe to have assisted us with our success of this guideline implementation in particular. Our community has come together like never before, and we have seen many of the silos reduced that had us initially working in isolation. This has allowed us to obtain feedback in new ways and to have a more consistent communication line with many stakeholders, including our Indigenous lead agencies. This opportunity has offered virtual access not only for patients, but for leaders connecting with one another more often and more efficiently than ever. Virtual connection has its limitations, but the pandemic has forced us to attempt this new platform, which I believe to have opened the doors to enhance engagement by making meetings more accessible to those outside our agency. Another unique external barrier that has challenged our team has been the extreme threat of wildfire activity around our community for 2 years in a row now. In a previous presentation, I explained that for the past 2 years, we have had to evacuate our hospital due to approaching wildfires. Fire 49 in 2020 led to a sudden community-wide evacuation, and Fire 77 in 2021 was a prolonged community alert, which progressed to extremely poor air quality conditions. These conditions resulted in a planned evacuation of our hospital and adjacent long-term care facility. Fortunately, neither of these fires caused damage to our infrastructure, but they were another impending disaster situation that altered our focus on quality improvement efforts, such as the person and family-centered guideline implementation.
We also learned after we had thought we did really well during that first evacuation that we didn't do as well as we had thought. And we realized without truly capturing the Indigenous voice, we would always fail. The Indigenous population did not feel supported as we had hoped during the transfer of care and felt that we could have done more. We realized from that incident that there's the importance of gauging and creating relationships so that we can better hear the patient voice and finding ways to make them comfortable enough to speak to us in the moment that they need to.
Much of our person and family centered guideline has been focused on recommendations 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3. So as previously mentioned, our organization had selected this guideline based on a thorough needs assessment and gap analysis that began prior to the implementation of this project at our facility through our strategic planning community engagement sessions. Our senior leadership team heard that we could do better when it came to patient and family experience, specifically for our Indigenous population. Our CEO and senior leadership team committed to this work by including attributes of the concept into our value statements and strategies within our organizational scorecard. We began obtaining more directed feedback, starting with Indigenous-led agencies that assisted in supporting many of the patients we had identified as having not had a good experience at our hospital. To effectively engage this population, we needed to develop trust, and to develop trust, we needed to start including the patient and their support networks in co-designing and developing our services. Our CEO began what we now know as our Indigenous Patient Experience Working Group. This group consists of hospital staff spanning frontline to senior level leaders, patients, frontline staff and leaders of local Indigenous-led agencies, as well as physicians. The group began by acknowledging that the hospital was ready to listen and engage in understanding how to make care more accessible and appropriate. It allowed patients, families, and their supports the forum to offer their stories and experiences in a safe and approachable way. This group has since influenced many changes throughout our organization. Some practical examples of embedding this cultural safety within our hospital systems and policies are including interview questions related to culturally safe care and examining ongoing performance of respect and cultural awareness in routine staff performance reviews. These examples were direct suggestions and ideas that were cultivated within the working group.
As Meghan said, being affected by not just two wildfire evacuations, we were given the unprecedented opportunity to test run our work again to see what it looked like the second time around in terms of our patients being put in the same scenario. And we found that giving a voice to the population through the cultural work we were doing made them feel better served when emergencies do occur and the natural shift between patient-centeredness to patient safety occurs, while recognizing that we are by no means perfect and we're on the tip of the iceberg in building this relationship. But we did have an Indigenous partner comment to our board of directors that this is the best relationship they've felt they've ever had with our organization.
Through our learnings with the working group, we also identified environmental design as one area that we could make a tangible difference in. Although we have a lot of work left to do, we have implemented many visible changes at our small facility over the past couple of years. We heard from our group that seeing familiar design and items is comforting to patients. Use and visibility of their language has also been communicated as something that should be incorporated more so in the future. And our nursing team has taken an initial lead on this specific initiative and have sought out medical dictionaries in the language that is most common to our region. The working group has been an invaluable avenue for us to gain insight, take part in active listening, and make meaningful change in each of our daily practices, but also on system level initiatives. This work is just beginning, and we are very hopeful we are on the right track. This will be monitored by a continual feedback loop that is offered not only by this working group, which will continue to meet on a regular basis, but also with the metrics tracked by the Person and Family Centered Guideline, as well as other data obtained by directed survey responses. In addition to environmental design, education and training were emphasized as a need within our hospital team. It was important that we recognized we had a lot to learn when it came to the history of Indigenous people in our region and within Canada. This knowledge empowered us to be more understanding of the need for reconciliation and to acknowledge the strengths of the Indigenous people and culture. We started with the hospital leadership team and sought out opportunities to obtain this training through programs such as Amanda mentioned and the Indigenous Canada course through the University of Alberta. Once the leadership team had this exposure, we then began to provide education opportunities for all other staff throughout the hospital. One of these courses was the Walk a Mile training, in which the facilitator allowed our healthcare providers to discuss stereotypes, misconceptions, and experiences of providing healthcare, while filtering in education on Canadian history through storytelling. Healthcare providers were educated on the Indigenous perspective and inequities when it comes to accessing healthcare. Through these learning experiences, we built empathy, understanding, and the desire to continue to make things better. You can go to the next slide, Amanda.
There seems to be a bit of a delay, which is so. I think one of the things that has helped us stay resilient during this time was finding ways to break out of the box we often find ourselves in when it comes to reports we have to hand in, rules we have to follow, data we have to submit where. But when looking at breaking out of that box is finding ways to do it that become meaningful. That ties back into how we've decided to go forward and how we change the way we do receive our feedback. I truly think before, when we were looking at recruiting for committees, we were still trying to fit people into boxes in ways that didn't make sense. So as we become more flexible in the way we gather these feedback, we've changed the way our Patient Family Advisory Committee is designed. It now has an open placeholder for Indigenous agencies so that any person who is tied to those agencies can come in and attend a meeting as works for them or they see fit in order to provide feedback. We realized that not everyone could attend that one scheduled meeting at the specific time once a month and serve for X amount as a term. So that's one way we modified it so that we could actually hear more voices. We also looked at the fact that our Indigenous community at the time did not have a fully trusting relationship with the hospital, but they did have a trusting relationship with partners who were very close or under the umbrella of the hospital. And we were able to use them as a bridge to get feedback from our partner agencies in order to hear their voice until they feel comfortable coming to us in the moment and on a regular basis. We also host periodic open fire pits where we invite anybody in the community to come forward to share stories around our fire pit that can be healthcare related or otherwise, as to promote trust, healing, and just another ways to capture the feedback we're seeking. Current projects that we are in the midst of working on as we move forward include redesigning our patient value statements. And it's been really exciting work seeing the amazing engagement we've had and the interest in adjusting this document at our hospital. But I believe that we will stay in our PDSA or Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle for way past my retirement. I think we have a lot of work to do. I don't want to sit here and say we're the experts by any means. I say we're taking some really good positive steps forward, and we plan to continue on this path.
So we just wanted to share some of the lessons learned thus far. So I contribute the progress we have made thus far with this guideline implementation to the emphasis our senior leadership team has placed on the importance of this topic for our organization. So the forward moving pace of this work has been greatly influenced by the leaders of our team contributing time and resources, even when it was tough to do so with the many barriers we have faced. If the leadership team has buy-in, this will trickle down to frontline staff. We've acknowledged that this can also be a difficult topic for professionals to take on at times, as no one comes to work here at the hospital with the intention to be harmful, but sometimes with the lack of understanding, mistakes are made. So what has been the most challenging for me personally was initially listening to the stories of patients and their supports talk about their experiences of receiving healthcare with us. And those experiences were far from what we wanted or expected to hear at times. So it takes courage to hear these voices and act on them, but it's extremely important, and it's what all of our patients deserve. So Amanda, I don't know if you have something to add to that.
Yeah, I would add one of the biggest lessons that I've learned through the work we've done so far is that the work we're doing today and continue to do is really competing against the work of generations. So it's so important to keep that in mind, because you may come to work with this portfolio, with this drive, with this vision to move this project forward, and then one situation can potentially undo or feel like it's undone all the work that you've put in to date. And it can be devastating, and it can take some time to move forward productively. But at the same time, you have to realize that the work that you are doing is making a difference, and it allows for that healing relationship to occur on a faster timeline each time you run into a hiccup. So, you know, sometimes culture change just feels like it's stuck and you're walking through quicksand and you're not sure if you're going to get there, but it's happening. It's just hard to realize when you're in the midst of it. So I thought that was really important to hand that along. So I think that would be it for my lessons learned, and I think we'll open up to any questions at this point.
So thank you, Megan and Amanda, for such a brilliant and very engaging presentation. It was really great to hear about the strategies that you've used to implement the person and family-centered care guideline, especially in the midst of crises such as the pandemic and forest fires that that has been experienced. So at this time, I would like to give the audience a chance to ask any questions. And if you do have a question, please type it in the chat box and we can definitely speak to them. I think there's one question here, and I think you might have alluded a bit to it, Amanda. And it's because of how did you get past staff culture for them to realize it was about the patient and not about them?
So I can comment a little bit about that one. And I think that was, you know, in some of my lessons learned, that was one of the hardest things, that you have to kind of depersonalize yourself from it and know where your intentions lie and that you want to make things better. I think this is really where education of our leadership team and frontline staff came in as well. One of the courses that we discussed was the Walk a Mile training, and that really allowed frontline staff to express their stories and their experiences at the same time as receiving education and getting to gain that better understanding of patients that they are seeing come through the hospital.
I think I can add to that a bit too. I would just say your staff are going to be at a spectrum of willingness to hear the information they need to hear. So some may get it right away, and some may need various types of training to understand what it is you're trying to achieve. As a poor analogy, I think of it as someone who's trying to lose weight and they're trying 40 different diets and then they find the one that works or the exercise plan that works. It's the same with this type of work. One size doesn't fit all. The first time you hear this information, you're talking to staff that wake up every day, they're driven to go to work, and they think they're doing the best, and they know where their morals and values lie. So when you sit in a room and hear the ways you're not measuring up, it's very hard to hear. And I think allowing for healing on the part of your staff and taking time to do things like the walk a mile training help with that so that they can take themselves essentially out of the picture and look at the systemic racism that occurs, the way that perceptions can be felt, even if the intentions aren't there. So I don't think one presentation or one initiative you will put in place will be the be all and end all, but I think the more you do it and the different ways you approach it, you allow your staff to have that growth, and then you'll eventually have more and more, and it'll become like a snowball that turns into a snowman. I'm just looking at a snowstorm out my window, so we'll throw out another analogy there.
Thanks, Amanda. I really love the point that you made about allowing time for your staff to really heal. I think that's very important with this particular initiative. There is another question in our chat box, and it's asking, how did you get your staff to participate in, for example, your champions meeting when they're having so many competing priorities like the pandemic, the emergency evacuations? Like, how did you keep that momentum with your staff or get them involved?
Yeah, I think for us, that continues to be a challenge, and it has been something that has been difficult throughout this last couple of years. I think just making those meetings as enjoyable as they can be, and you know, like I've heard it being talked about at other RNAO presentations, but just like offering that kind of celebratory environment when things are going well, and being able to bring those positive feedback back to the staff to show them that they are making a difference, and that the work that they are putting forward and taking this extra time commitment on is making a difference. So I think making that visible to them is very helpful.
Yeah.
And I think in the end, it's up to us as leadership to carve out that time for them. And I know certain things come in light. I'm fully aware of how priorities can change in an instant. But I think it comes back to us to say, okay, how can we circle back? What can we do for this individual to help them so that they can carry out the work?
Yeah, very important points. And I think, Meghan, you were the one that mentioned, you know, celebrating those wins for your staff, helping them see the small steps that they've taken. So that is also very, very important. We do have another question here. Did you experience any challenges getting engagement from the community itself? So for example, when you were developing your focus groups, did you have any challenges bringing that voice in terms of informing the work that you did?
I'll take it at first, Megan. You can add if I miss anything, but I would say definitely yes. I think the way we looked at collecting that feedback at first, like I mentioned, did not work. And I think one of the things that did benefit us is we had a fairly new leadership team in terms of holding the position, including our CEO. She had been in the position less than a year when the pandemic and the evacuation happened. So she took the initiative and went directly to partner organizations and kept going with the intent to listen. And then that once community groups felt listened to, and we had the working group. And I don't think there was the intent of doing much work at the beginning, but more just for us to listen until we felt we could move forward.
That's great to hear. Also, did you see, for example, looking at data, did you see any changes in your patient satisfaction survey in terms of improvement of responses since the implemented change, or what measures have you looked at that you saw improvements with?
Yeah, sorry, absolutely we did. I can say in the second quarter of this year, 100% of our survey return was from Indigenous individuals. And we've seen at least a 5% bump, if not more, some months in feedback return.
Awesome. That's really...
Yeah, some of it's hard to measure because we collect stories and just phone calls too, but that should be noted.
That's very good. I think there are just a few more questions here. What do you feel was one of the largest contributors to building an improved relationship with your community partners?
I can take this one. I think directly involving them in the development of our work plan related to that working meeting that we started. And just like Amanda had mentioned too, starting it out with just actively listening and hearing from them what they wanted to see happen rather than us driving those meetings. And then also just making tangible differences that were visible to them. So not only listening to their suggestions, but putting forward action. And for instance, we did the fire gathering pit outside, which has been a huge source of, like Amanda said, improved feedback for us. So they can see that we're committed to that work and that we want to make things better.
Thank you. I'm just going to highlight a comment here from Naomi, and she mentions is incredibly important what we're doing in terms of our discussion today. One more question that I have in mind for you. You mentioned the Indigenous Patient Experience Working Group that you've established. I really think this is a really good initiative. So do you meet on a regular basis and set goals? Or like, do you constantly evaluate your next steps as to what needs to be done?
Yeah, it's a working group that continues to meet on a regular basis. So we have standing members, but are very flexible in allowing for new members of the community to join, or anybody who's willing to offer input, including frontline staff. I think that's been kind of a driver of this work as well, is that we've really included not only leadership from the hospital, but frontline staff from the beginning as well, so that they can have their say and inform the work that's happening there as well, and share their experiences.
Awesome. And how do you ensure that the work that is accomplished to date or has been on the way, that is adequately communicated to the rest of your team within the hospital? How have you done that?
So I think this is always a challenging part because it's, ingrained into our daily work as leaders, but we want to make sure that that gets communicated out to the frontline staff who are out there on a daily basis, making a difference and caring for these patients. So just again, involving them in that working group and giving them the opportunity to provide their perspective and influence that work. And then connecting the dots from the strategic plan to initiatives that are being experienced by them. So for instance, we developed a smudging procedure and policy. So it had been a need here for a long time that, we didn't feel like we could accommodate, but because of this working group, we were led towards that direction. And so staff were seeing that work come through and be influence patients' care on a daily basis. So I think that's really helped as well.
And I should add to that, we had forgotten to mention that I think we've used the typical pathways of emails and inviting people to events and putting up posters throughout the hospital, but we also have it with the system approach we're taking. It's ingrained in every probationary evaluation and every interview we do from now on has a cultural safety question embedded in it too. And we show a video on orientation. So all of these things now set the expectation off the bat, and every time there's a review. So as it becomes embedded and ingrained in the system, they feel it because it's tied to things they're used to.
Yeah, and I think that's very important. I think tying all those pieces to your strategic goals, integrating it within training, even in your interview process, I think all those are very important. So Amanda and Meghan, I want to thank you once again for taking the time out to share with us the work that you're doing. We've had a very engaging discussion this afternoon. And as we prepare to wrap up today's webinar, I would like to thank everyone for taking the time out from your day to take part in this webinar. And just to let everyone know that you'll soon receive a link to an online survey to evaluate today's presentation. And please let us know of any suggested topics you would like us to work on or speak about. And then immediately after you've done the evaluation, you will receive your certificate of attendance. And finally, I would just like to let everyone know that this work is funded by the Government of Ontario. Again, we want to thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.